Counselor Accents Podcast. Two school counselors who love their jobs. Oh, and they happen to have Southern accents too. Bless their hearts.
I'm Laura Rancorn.
And I am Kim Crumply. I'm Crumply. And together we are Counselor Accents, two current school counselors who are in the trenches with you.
We know the issues you're facing because we're living them with you every single day.
I am loving this new intro because I've always wanted to work on an airline, and I feel like we know that you have choices when it comes to air travel, and we thank you for choosing Southwest Airlines.
I have also wanted to be a flight attendant, and I would love for us to be a flight attendant together. I think that would be so ideal.
Those poor people.
Wouldn't that
Just
be so much fun?
You'd be knocking people down with your very size.
Oh, well,
Just
yeah.
like you'd be
You're
reaching
right.
to the top of the plane.
Right. And this bun would be scraping the top.
They could.
Yeah.
But just think, all that, it sounds glamorous. I'm sure it sounds more glamorous than it probably is.
Yeah. I am not built for air travel.
I don't know that I could. Okay, I don't know how we went down this path, but we're people who are supposed to be helping people in careers, not talking them out of it. So that we have actually met, if you will remember, in where were we? Whatever. Austin, Texas. At ASCA, there was a group too, I think Delta and maybe another group who were actually recruiting, and I think that we went over there and they shooed us away.
And they said, no, thank you.
No,
thank you. The size of my hand alone would crush a can. It would not.
And they said, exactly. You'd be just like, you want this to drink, like Andre the Giant. And they looked at me and said, you are a little long in the tooth to start this career. But I do remember that. Yeah, so there must be a need for those. I don't know how we went down that other than to say we enjoy this intro. And thank you. Thank you. Who was our intro guy that we heard? We were on his podcast.
Oh, Jacob Chastain. Yeah.
He has a great intro. And we said, why not? Because it can feel like you're listening to podcasts or whatever you're doing. Do they really understand what I'm doing every day? And we're not administrators. We're not, we're literally school counselors, which is what we've been called to do, what we are doing. And we do realizes the changes that you've seen over the last couple of years. We're feeling it in education. We're there with you. So a lot of the people that we have on the podcast are answers to our own problems also. I mean, we're there with you. We understand what you're going through every day. Hats off.
Well said. Hence the in the trenches. We're right there. So, boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground.
Kim, the guest that we have today is Ryan Reese. And this was someone that you were insistent about having him on. You've been very excited about having him on.
I have been.
His topic is right up your alley.
It is. And I will say that it's very, I like things that are different and outside the box. And this, to me, he had written an article for ASCA, and I actually thought it was a book. And I still think there's this book out there, and I don't know who has written this book, but he did an article for ASCA, and it was about nature and bringing nature to our students and using that for counseling. And it just made sense. And so he's a professor. And so he teaches school counselors, but he has a great love for the outdoors. And I always think there's different, and as I say, more than one way to skin a cat. And so he kind of brings about some of these different ideas of things that maybe you haven't thought about as a school counselor.
I like it.
So I'm excited about that. And you know how you love nature. So why would I not have him on when you're such a nature lover?
I am hoping that this episode and interview inspires me to think of nature more than just like my idea of roughing it is sitting in an air conditioned RV. Like, ooh, that is so rough.
I will drag us out in 100 degrees to sit outside to talk, and you're like, there's insects everywhere. There's things out here.
Well, when I think about nature, I do think about, several things come to my mind actually. One time we were in another location preparing to speak the following day, and I just wanted to sit in the comfort of our air conditioned room. And you were like, let's go sit outside. And so we did. We went and sat outside. And I think I am the only person, like I could go in the Guinness Book of World Records as the only person that a stink bug, which normally doesn't bite, it actually bit me. Not once, but twice while we were sitting out there.
This is a true story, which is hilarious.
And then while we were sitting out there, the ants came and started biting my feet. And it was a miserable getting ready for the next day. Like it was miserable.
You were like scratching and itching and griping at me that I had took you outside and you were attacked by these stink bugs. Well, I have to tell you my nature tale, if I may.
Okay.
That made me think of your nature tale. But Philip and I were out in, I don't know, somewhere out in the waters. And we had taken a cruise, and it was like the Caribbean, and they take you out to the stingrays, So, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
My mind went to the crocodile hunter. What was
hang on. So we get out there, and they put the little life vest around you, and you jump out into the water. And they said that it's just going to be like a herd of cattle that come in. And they said they'll do stuff like suck on your toes, and they want you to pet them. Well, I'm like, this is wonderful.
You see my face. Our listeners can't see my face, but this sounds like a horrible experience.
Well, listen, it's just my life. So anyway, these things do come at you. You can see them coming because the water is so clear. It looks like you could touch bottom, but you can't. You got these little floaties on keeping you up. Well, as they're coming in, I'm starting to feel a little panicked, because they do get all the way around you, and they do want to be pet. They want you to pet them. Well, they said to be calm, but as they kind of got near and near to me, I was kind of panicking, and I guess they're like any other animal; they can sense panic. So I'm kind of thrashing, like hitting the water and starting to thrash, and one whips around and gets me with their tail.
Oh my!
Wait, on it.
Was this before or after the crocodile hunters?
It was right before the crocodile hunters.
Okay.
And so it barbs me on my. I still have a scar. It got me on my ankle, and that's not a very bleedy place. But I start bleeding into
the
water. Well, guess who has to come in after paying for everybody, Laura? So I sat on the ship or whatever we're on, the little boat taking us all back. So we've all paid, $150 for this experience. And everybody's giving me dirty looks because I ruined it for everybody.
Oh my goodness.
It would have seemed that if somebody just starts bleeding profusely out into the water, shark-infested waters, that make everybody come in. So I'm sitting there all redheaded and white and dripping wet like a drowned cat, and people give me dirty looks, and Philip's totally embarrassed, hacked, as we say. He's so embarrassed. He's just sitting there patting me and but anyway, I think that I may have saved a life, because it wasn't long after that Steve Irwin was killed by one of these gentle, air quote, creatures. So that's my nature story, which I got a million of them. I got a million stories, but we're going to turn it over and let this guy. Hey, listen, he wears a bun on top of his head too.
Oh, that's why I've got this on my head today.
Thank you. Welcome, Ryan Reese. If all our listeners out there will take note, that is, I have shown up and Laura has not. Actually, Laura had something come up, and so that's all the better for me. I get more time with Dr. Reese. So, and she was super excited about this. But again, I get more time with Dr. Reese. I am so excited about this topic. But I have on today Dr. Reese, who is going to talk to us a little bit about nature access for students through Eco Wellness. And that may sound like something you've never heard of, and that might be new thought and a growth mindset for some of us. But before we get into that, Dr. Reese, will you just tell us a little bit of who you are and what you do? And I have to say, if you are, we're going to be talking about nature. If you're not watching this, you need to watch this. Dr. Reese is in the full what you would expect the nature. I mean, we got the flannel shirt on and the woodsy home area. So it's beautiful. It's a beautiful picture. Good looking guy, good looking view there that I'm looking at, Dr. Reese. So if you are listening, you need to watch this one. Back to you, Dr. Reese. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Well, please interrupt me if I meander and wander too much with my response here. So I'm an associate professor at Oregon State University Cascades campus in Bend, Oregon, in the Master of Counseling program here. We have a school counseling track, so K-12 school counseling. We also have a clinical mental health counseling track at this campus as well. I've been here for about 10 years now, so quite a while here in Bend and at OSU Cascades. Alongside that, I've had a private practice during that time where I serve predominantly tweeners, adolescents, and young adults, as well as older adults, but predominantly kind of in that adolescent range. And I integrate quite a bit of nature-based work into my counseling with clients. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
Well, I can't believe you're old enough to have done all these things, but I'm going to take your word for it. I want to tell you a little bit about how Laura and I came across your work. I know you had published an article in Ask a Magazine for school counselors who are looking and may have read that. But also, ASCA has published a book. Is that correct? Do you have a book also about nature?
I do not have a book with ASCA or with ACA, but I do have a book contract that I'm working on at the moment. It's due here in another year, so I'll be putting that together just in the next year. So that should be out sometime late 2024, 2025, somewhere in that realm.
Now, is it going to be on this subject?
It is, yep. So it's on eco wellness, bringing nature into counseling, and really specifically how school counselors, how clinical mental health counselors, or helping professionals more broadly, how they can bring that into their traditional practice. Because I think this idea of nature-based counseling or wilderness therapy or ecotherapy, getting outdoors, it's not something that's necessarily achievable or possible for all school counselors. I mean, they don't have the time to do that. And so a lot of what I look at doing is how do we see eco wellness or the human nature connection as being one broader aspect of our well-being or wellness, and to simply just be asking questions about that with the students who we're serving.
So, Laura and I had read the article, and I don't know why I dreamed there was a book already, but I'm looking forward to the book. But one of the things that caught our attention was we're always saying, and I may be looking at this wrong, but we always say there's more than one way to skin a cat, and I am in no way skinning actual cats. That's a Southern saying that says there's more than one way to do something. And so we really try to encourage counselors to get outside of the box, and there are different ways to communicate with kids and different activities that you can say, yes, this is really a school counseling. This is a way that we can reach kids. And so when we saw that through nature, we thought, how really cool is this? But I want to back up and just get your definition of what eco wellness is.
Yeah, I'd say the kind of the textbook definition would be one sense of appreciation, respect for, and awe of nature or non-human nature, natural living systems that translates into enhanced holistic wellness for an individual, and or just greater feelings of interconnectedness with self, others, natural environment. And so and really I can go more into just kind of the research around how nature or non-human nature, and you'll hear me say that quite a bit, non-human nature, because I think that it's hard to make an argument that humans are not part of this intricate web that affects us. We have been with and around natural living systems for as long as humans have been around, and so that's why I use that terminology. But yeah, nature impacts so much in terms of our physical health, our mental health, our social connections. It impacts nearly every facet of wellness. And so that's why we called it eco-wellness. But I think importantly, it really needs to spark a curiosity inside of us and an interest, I think, to really have some of those effects beyond just being in the presence of it.
So when you're talking about thinking about that everyday school counselor and you're talking about nature, just think about that K through 12 student and what are some practical rubber meets the road ways that, and I know that school counselors, some of them are rural. I have a lot of land here where I'm at in my school, but some are in the city. So I guess that's a two-parter. What's the positive impacts and how do you practically do that in a school counseling setting?
I think first we can look at our office settings. We can look at whether or not our office has a window. I know not all school counselors are going to have a window, but if you do have a window, what's outside of your window? If it's not just concrete, but there are trees or a tree or some bushes outside. I think about how we're formatting our office space. Granted, I'm not an interior designer, so I don't know about these things, but I've been really intentional with how I orient my office space in my private practice office as well as at the university. And so just having there be an opportunity to have that natural sunlight coming in, because
we know natural sunlight helps with helps our brain feel better, and we know all the research about that. That's a very good point. I always say I cannot be anywhere where there's not a window, but I know not everybody has that luxury. I totally get that.
Yeah. So also just orienting to view. So even if there is only a tree, it's just a tree. Sometimes I hear that. I'll hear clinical mental health counselors, school counselors say, well, gosh, it's not a huge deal. It's just a tree. And we don't know that it's not a big deal. And in particular, because there are some really fascinating and interesting studies where folks have a view of nature outside of their hospital window, let's say, that then affects things like stress reduction, attention restoration, or helping people focus or restore attention properties. And so there are some elements around that that's important. And so we can't really underestimate that. Also, a colleague of mine in Eugene, she's a clinical psychologist. Her name is Dr. Patricia Hasbach, and she loves having nature objects just in a basket. So whether it's pine cones, rocks, pine needles, whatever kind of natural elements there might be, that is something that with many of her clients, she'll have clients walk in and they'll pick something out of the basket and they'll describe what that object kind of means to them relative to that particular day and or just sort of what represents to them. So in terms of just metaphor and kind of how students can be talking about their lives via this medium of nature or natural objects. So that is another real, I think, utility kind of around that. I think about sand trays, so for K-5 folks and maybe school counselors in middle and high schools, depending. I think about having there be sort of natural objects or nature objects, not to even say that they're made of real nature. Maybe they're plastic trees, plastic animals, but it can provide you with a window into their everyday nature connectedness. Even if you're just asking about, hey, show me what home looks like. Oh, well, there's this tree that's outside of my apartment complex, let's say, or outside of my home. Oh, tell me about that tree. Do you spend time near that tree? just to get an idea or a sense about a student's connectedness with nature, because that's also then a pathway toward possible education, depending on the developmental level with that specific student or with the student's family or caregiver or guardians, to be able to talk about possible nature access. So anyway, sorry, I'm kind of getting off of that first
No,
question in terms of just
it
some of
is,
those practical things, but
yeah, it's so interesting. And I think this is the first year that I've had a fountain in my room. It's the
mm,
first year that I have a sand tray out where, like, right there on my desk. And we laugh about it because I think my teachers they come in and they will gravitate toward that sand tray and the rocks that are there and the I'm looking at it now, the little moss rock and all the stuff to work in that sand garden. So do you see a trend more to people picking up on, we were in this, I almost want to say, crisis of trauma. We have so many students who post pandemic, and we were trending that way anyway, who have so many social emotional needs, and anything that we can do to help kids calm or to cope or to center. So do you think that we're seeing more trending toward nature?
I think that maybe it depends on your geographic location. I think it depends on um, the school, depends on the counselor. But what I will tell you is that I think with increasing frequency, I'm getting emails from school counselors, from clinical mental health counselors, whether they're prospective students, whether they're current practitioners or professional school counselors, with interest to kind of say, hey, like, how do I bring this more into the work? And I think about the pandemic. The pandemic was really interesting in some different ways in terms of geographically, depending on where you were. Folks did feel comfortable to go outdoors, particularly in lower density populated areas.
Mhm.
Whereas in high density areas, even if you had a park nearby you, you were still cooped up in your
Yeah,
home or in your apartment or wherever you may
yeah,
be. And so I think just in my own observation, in my own clinical practice, I think for some folks, I really saw an uptick in terms of
mm,
how folks were utilizing or accessing nature or natural environments as a wellness resources. Whereas for others, it's sort of like it kind of came in more inward. And so now it's about sort of moving back outward, kind of around that. But I certainly see this being um, definitely a tool, or a co-facilitator and I guess a wellness process for folks. And I think particularly as climate change, the climate crisis, as that becomes more into focus, increasingly so, as part of that conversation is this conversation around our historical and continued connection with natural settings and nature more broadly.
so w- we and we say do you can do things differently than we've done before, and that would include taking your students outside the for a walk, or going out and sit, if you can, if you're in a school where you can take students out to sit on the grass, which I have done, and it really changes the dynamics.
Mhm.
And so I know for myself, if you know it is, I think, for anybody, if they can, you're in the mountains or you have rocks around you or you have a creek, it just kind of lowers those stress hormones. And so sometimes if we can bring that to these kids who can't access that in their own way, their families aren't taking the trips to see these things, or they're not able to get out of that complex and see these things. So
Mhm.
plants, or is that another thing that you consider as bringing nature
Yeah,
into the classroom?
totally. So indoor or nearby nature, as far as having real plants, there have been some studies looking at just the effects of having a plant in your room and its effects on focus, concentration, stress reduction, and things that we just can't even sense or really even just have in our perceptual awareness. So
We're
it's a,
not aware that this is happening to our bodies, but it is. It's there.
exactly. Yeah.
Can I ask about other things like colors in your counseling office? Do you go into that part of it too?
I would say colors. I'm a little less cued into in terms
Okay.
of um, yeah. I think in terms of colors, but when we think about the symmetry of nature. I think that that's something that, whether it's completely symmetrical, when we think about a tree, whether it's conical or whether it looks like a triangle or whatever, like our eyes just go to those things, or if it's chaotic, our eyes goes to those things as well in terms of curiosity. So I think that's where there's this intersecting, or at least highly correlated, construct of mindfulness, which is also a critical component of, I think, fostering and developing nature connectedness. Because if we're not slowing down and paying attention to the here and now, or paying attention on purpose in this moment without judgment, we may have a hard time also sort of like noticing these things that are right in front of us as well, including, you mentioned kind of those nature sounds, like going back to kind of in the office, like having nature sounds in the background. There's strong research that suggests that listening to nature sounds has a restorative effect on our nervous system and reducing stress, as you shared there. So
that is fantastic. Those are fantastic. I think that's what our listeners, school counselors, want to know. What can we do? What is anything, any helps that we can get? And those are small things. I mean, just having that nature sounds and what that could do for your students, or put a plant in, or talk a little bit about, I know that in your article you talk about the 7 factors of eco wellness.
Mhm.
Can we talk a little bit about those? Just go through this quickly. Do you want me to call them out to you, or do you have those in front of you? Or you have that?
They're up here.
Live in it. Okay.
Yeah. So when we developed the construct of eco wellness, a goal around that was to identify these different facets of one's connectedness with nature as it correlates with wellness or health. And so I'll try to go through these fairly quickly, but when I'm thinking about working with an individual, and specifically around their nature connectedness, I'm thinking about these different areas. So this first one would be around physical access. So whether it's physical access just here in the office, importantly for the students that we're working with, what is their nature access like at home? Are they in a nature desert to where there's really no nature around them? And also thinking specifically about safe access to nature, because that's another thing that I talk often with folks about, is like, do you feel safe in the nature that's nearby you? Also, physical access, just how is the individual even defining nature? Because I think it's important for us school counselors to be aware of our own nature worldview, and what we define to be nature may be different than how our students or their families are defining nature. There are some really important cultural considerations around that. The next one is around sensory access, and we've been talking about that predominantly. So nature sounds, views of nature, murals of nature, touching nature, smelling nature. We want to be careful with scents, because certainly, we can have allergic reactions to that. So to be conscientious of that, but and also thinking about kind of the virtual nature as well for folks at home, in terms of when they're at home. So that's another form of just education with families as well. When we're thinking about emotional regulation tools, that's just one added tool to the tools that folks will hopefully have accessible to themselves. So that's kind of
that virtual. What would that, an example of that be? And even in my room, I have a huge screen television. So having that relaxing mountain scene, or is that kind of what you're talking about by that virtual nature?
Totally. So maybe there's a scene that a child or an adolescent is really keen on, and kind of that could be one way to come back into regulation. Again, one way. It's not a panacea. Like we need to make sure we're wrapping a number of resources around our students, but as a possibility, including those soothing nature sounds, making sure that it's a soothing nature sound. For example, some people really like birds chirping nature sounds. They really stress me out. Okay, so like it's for me, it's more of like rain sounds or ocean sounds or bubbling brook. But everyone's tastes
it's
are
personal.
Really
okay,
different.
I got
that.
Need to take that into consideration when you may be stressing your student out.
Totally. The next facet is connectedness, and that's what it sounds like. But really thinking about where are nearby places where a student lives, where a family lives, where they feel connected with nature. This is really important for folks as well who are maybe moving to a new area. Like a term that we're hearing more is climate refugees. So whether it's folks living in California, moving into Oregon outside of Oregon, like, or wherever it may be, or in lowland areas, having to move and escape water, coming from other countries in the United States, asking about connectedness with nature. Because when we develop a sense of place attachment with a particular place, and then it's gone, we're going through a grieving process, and we may not even be aware of it. When we're coming into a new place, it may be beautiful to the person who's lived there a long time, but it's completely new and novel to the person who's just moved there. And so that can be a thing just to be asking about, as far as like, what kind of connection do you have to the places near where you live? What kinds of connections do you have with important family members or people who have passed on around those outdoor spaces? So again, these are just things we can be asking and checking in about around wellness resources for our students, even without going outdoors. The next facet is the protection facet. If I were to rename it, it would be nature self-efficacy. So in other words, how effective does the person feel accessing their local nearby nature? Is just traversing the park, going to the park, walking to the park, being there. How comfortable is the family as just a whole unit in going on a picnic to that place? And also, I think that this is connected with other domains as well, but in thinking about just whether or not a person does feel safe in these environments, just culturally speaking. So for people of color, this is a really critical issue, particularly in white majority places, such as U.S. forests, national parks. There's going to be a sense of concern, or there often is, around going into this environment and feeling like people are watching you and having to watch your own back and fear of being accused of doing something. So that's really important. The next component is around preservation. And so thinking about doing things for the natural world or environment to where I feel good about myself. Like, oh, I'm recycling. If recycling is an opportunity where folks are living geographically, or planting plants or a tree, taking action, writing a letter to a congressperson, any of those kinds of things to really feel like we're having a positive impact, however small that may be. Because I think that is sort of this double-edged part of this preservation component, particularly in the context of climate change, is that, as we're seeing, like, we can be strong advocates for the environment and high on this domain of eco-wellness and the preservation facet, but ultimately feel depressed, feel anxious. So it's really important to help folks develop a sense of control or a sense of impact, however small.
That is so good. And if school counselors aren't accessing that part of the students' feeling, even if there is no greater joy or pride that I've seen in students than maybe doing a cleanup campaign on your campus or planting trees or plants. They are helping take care of. That's one of the things that we do through my counseling advisory, is part of a program where we, in school counselors may not be thinking about that, is is being part of a community cleanup effort and students being a part of that. And so look into your state, whatever state you are. There may be competitions. We're involved in a competition, and part of my advisory committee kind of helped lead that. But when it's time to trim or to put bark out or anything, we involve the students in that. So you may not think of that as a school counselor, as that's part of your job, but anything that I think that helps kids cope, or that connectedness that they feel, or that sense of pride that, like you're saying, I'm giving back I'm helping, I'm doing something good. It gives them such a great sense of pride. So I'm so glad that you brought that. I'm sorry I jumped right in there.
No worries. So the last two facets, spirituality and community connectedness. So spirituality, I love the question of, where do you feel small and big at the same time? Because I think that really gets at this notion of spirituality. Not that one doesn't necessarily is feeling connected to a higher power. Certainly that might be part of it, but just that's where it's like, where do you experience a sense of awe and wonderment, and curiosity? So I think that is so key and critical, I think, to eco wellness and fostering that connectedness component. The community connectedness piece is the research to me is so fascinating, for the some studies that have been done kind of around experiencing a greater sense of social or community connectedness, in the presence of nature when we're not competing for basic resources. That's a critical component there, but um, feeling a greater sense of closeness with others. And so I think, you know, that that part. Um, so whether it's within family structures, if school counselors can ever do this, I know it may be a stretch, but to even have opportunities to facilitate a small group in nature for a number of weeks. I've seen some school counselors do that where they're afforded with or have the luxury of having access to outdoor spaces. There's the sense of cohesion that can really happen in outdoor environments that isn't necessarily happening within indoor environments, or at least that can happen more quickly. Is kind of what the research has shown, as well as just anecdotally and from a clinical perspective from what I've seen. So those are these 7 different facets. We've actually updated those just rather recently and reduced them down a little bit more concisely, but I won't go into that here. I think that those 7 facets are, I think, important. They're important for us to think about from a holistic place and perspective, and just finding those tangible ways to bring that into the counseling office as a school counselor. And when I think about developing larger curriculum, where and how can I partner with other educators within the curriculum? So whether we're talking about STEM educators, if there's an environmental education course, there are some key places I think that school counselors can partner in. Not to say you're delivering an entire large group guidance unit, but maybe you're coming in for one lesson, for example, to share a bit about eco wellness, or to share a bit about how, in addition to the science content, here is how nature connectedness can impact your mental health and well-being.
I love that. And that is such a great thought, that we can collaborate with our science, with our STEM, with where we feel like that they're doing these things. Let's bring in that social emotional part of that, because I totally agree. I've lived it. I know what nature, how I feel, and to bring this to students. And I think that in this day and age where students are so tied to the screen and not in a nature way tied to the screen, that they're missing something that maybe we as educators got to enjoy more of, is to be present in the moment and to enjoy nature and to be aware of nature. I love that this is that ASCA did put this in, that recognizes the work that you're doing, and that I don't know if you're the only one that is. I guess you're the expert in this. You're the eco wellness guy, right? I mean, this is your baby.
So yeah, this is my firstborn, and certainly my mentor Jane Myers had a lot of contributions to eco wellness before her passing. And there's a number of other, I think, key players in this too, which is really exciting about. So earlier when we were talking about Sandtray, who came to mind and I didn't share at the moment, Dr. Jacqueline Swank, who I believe now is, University of Missouri, maybe, was at the University of Florida. So sorry if I'm misspeaking, Jacqueline, and you're listening to this, but she developed a framework around, it's a long one, nature-based child-centered play therapy. And so there are some articles out there about that, and I think really interesting, and about using natural objects within the context of play therapy. Debbie Sturm also comes to mind. Debbie is at James Madison University, and she and I are working together on some projects around eco wellness and climate change. And currently we have a project right now where we're asking both K-12 school counselors as well as environmental and STEM educators about, hey, how do we address the social emotional learning components around climate change in a way that isn't just another thing for school counselors to do? And when I think about, so we collected these data back in spring of 2022. just the number of emails from school counselors, saying, I'm overwhelmed, can't complete the survey. Like, hey, overwhelmed, I can't add another thing to my load. I can't even think about climate change. Why are you emailing me about this? Just meaning folks are taxed. So I think that's where we're really trying to find ways to where this isn't just another thing that school counselors are having to do, but it's just an opportunity to integrate into the broader curriculum, and finding ways that are intentional and specific to the student body that school counselors are serving.
So, Ryan, I thank you so much for coming on. One of the things that Laura and I are looking at right now is what people are passionate about. And through that passion, they're lining up their careers with that passion and they're changing the world. And this is a perfect example of what we are seeing with great people who are doing great things. It's usually they have their passion and they're helping us move along and understand. And it takes somebody passionate. And to see you take your passion and mirror that and join your job with that passion. And that may be not how you see this but I can just see this kid growing up who's passionate about nature, who loves nature, and is working with school counselors now. And I think that is amazing. And I appreciate what you've had to say. I've always believed it, that it helps students, but you've got the research to prove it. And I appreciate you for coming on today and sharing all this with us. Tell us a little bit about you. You've got a book that'll be out in a couple of years. You're working on that. And you do speaking, correct?
Speaking, say more about that.
Workshops?
Oh yeah. So workshops, I would say those happen every now and again. Right now, I'm just totally immersed in research and writing. I think that trying to get out what I have and to get that out in the world, and just the collaborations that I have with some of these research partners, and again, just great people, and also trying to elevate other people doing the work. And I think particularly around the climate crisis work, I think that is ACES, or the Association for Counselor Education and Supervision. The president just developed a task force around that. She asked me to co-chair that along with Debbie Sturm. And so really trying to elevate these issues at a counselor education level to where any school counselor going through a program is going to be exposed to some of these issues in curriculum. Not even that it has to be eco-wellness, but just that we're talking about nature connectedness as a broader aspect of wellness, and also helping school counselors think strategically about where and how does social emotional learning, where and how does that kind of fit into the possible guidance curriculum. So those are some kind of key areas that really are taking up a lot of my time right now, and that I'm passionate about, and that are super important. And who knows?
Impressive.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe at some point in time, we develop some kind of pie in the sky sort of curriculum at a university level around eco wellness, and that would be accessible to folks. So that would be another kind of goal that's kind of there, and at the and hoping to dive into that at some point.
That sounds fantastic. Anything that you want to share, that if listeners want to get a hold of you or get more of Ryan Reese, then if you just want to put that in the chat, and we'll make sure that we link that. And Dr. Reese, thank you once again. And I'm so glad that Laura wasn't here, is all I can say.
Well, I appreciate both you and Laura having me, Kim.
Thanks. Okay, Laura, how cute is he?
Super cute.
So cute. And just so I'm sure Dr. Reese appreciates that.
Being called so cute.
But anyway, I really enjoyed some of the rubber meets the road. First of all, let me just say, Laura, you and I love anybody that's passionate about what they do. And I love that he's taken his passion, which is outdoors. He creates, he just brings that alongside it is his life.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty neat that he's woven that into school counseling world and to his eco wellness, which he developed clinic. And it was interesting. So that's one thing. And to think about doing things maybe a little bit differently. And then I think about kids who are nature poor. We talk to a lot of different people all over the United States, and you and I both, we kid about outdoors and all of that, but we really live in a rural area, both of us. So we have a lot of area. Our schools and where we live, there's a lot of area to get out, but that's not always the case. And so, and even if you're in an area where you have a lot of outdoor you're in that building all day. And I love the ideas of the sand tray in the classroom, because that's bringing that nature in to the classroom. Laura, yourself, you've used rocks before in your, what did you do with rocks? You brought them in, worry rocks, right? Was that what you used?
I do use rocks for kids that are worried about things. I have a bucket of rocks. I also brought some rocks in, like geodes, I brought geodes in because they look like rocks on the outside, but they're beautiful on the inside. So I use that with.
Yeah. So, and just one of the things that is my next step, I think that I want to do is I have a fountain. And that fountain, kids are drawn to that. They love that. I have to say my teachers are mostly drawn to that sand table. They just know it's in there, and it's hilarious how they have to get in there and work in that. But having the nature sounds, and that's something that you can turn on, and it is something that we know research shows that it can lower those stress hormones. So there's a lot of rubber meets the road ideas, and there are so many more. Those are just things that I could think that could be next steps for me. And also, we had somebody ask us, is walking around the track with a student, is that counseling? And now we have the research that shows, he's doing this research that says just being outdoors helps to lower, those stresses and things like that. So yeah, he's next level, outdoor guy, and I love his passion about it, and I love what people like him can open the eyes of other people on things that they're doing.
Well,
And hey, I can learn from you, just like we did with Cassie Stevens or anybody else that's so passionate about what they do. That passion sparks creativity, almost like passing the torch or the light, and
yeah.
it makes me think differently about things.
That's what I was going to say. Going into this, I joked around about like my experiences with nature and how I would rather stay in something air conditioned. My idea of roughing it is somebody that's got a window unit instead of central heat and air. That's roughing it. And that would be equivalent to being out in nature. And so, but when you see his passion, you see how excited he is. It is hard like that excitement is contagious, and it makes it makes me think I can do this and I want to do this. And so I think that's the beauty of people who can bring in what they love to enhance or accent, if I may, their school counseling program. And he's certainly done that. And I believe inspired a bunch of us who are listening to do the same.
Absolutely. I think one of the greatest things he said was the awe that nature inspires in us, because we can be in a forest of trees and feel so very small, but then we can look at the tiny little ant, and he didn't say that. I just, that awe part he was talking about, because I know what that feels like. And I think, like any good teacher, we can, you think about these science teachers who, and maybe, if you didn't have one, there was somebody in your life who looked at nature and kind of helped you see it a little bit differently. And we can do that for our students. And that, yes, that is something a school counselor can do. So hats off to you, Dr. Reese.
Very good. Well, depending on when you're listening to this, we have a live podcast on January 23rd. If you're listening to this and it's January 24th, then you missed it by a day. But don't you worry, because I'll bet that we're going to have another one of these pretty soon. So that's all the more reason why you need to be following our social media accounts, Instagram, and you can follow us on Facebook to find out when we're having events like this. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. We send out updates and links to wonderful blog posts and our podcast episode and things that might help you during this season of school counseling. So make sure you've subscribed to that. And then also make sure you rate and review our podcast, because it helps other people find these podcasts so other people can join in our live podcast events in the future. This was a great episode, Kim.
Thanks.
Thanks for finding me.
Glad you weren't on there with me.
Yeah. All right. Have a good week.